All right. Well, welcome everyone to the June meeting of the Hartford School Building Committee. My name is Nat Gale. I am the ex officio chair of the Hartford School Building Committee. And it's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'd like to start with just a welcome before we take roll and just acknowledge that today is the federally observed Juneteenth holiday. I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge that Juneteenth is all about, acknowledging the harm that this country inflicted upon enslaved Africans, and is an opportunity for us to think about the many ways that our collective work contributes to a push for equity, a push for justice, and the ability for all people to thrive and be free in our communities, in our cities, in our states, and in our country. So I hope that folks were able to take a moment this past weekend. Juneteenth was officially yesterday, and convene and celebrate in ways that are meaningful to you. And I would invite any committee members, if you feel called to say any words, either now or when we adjourn this meeting, I welcome that. I open the floor. Yeah, just curious if anybody has anything they want to add to that. I just wanted to make sure we take a moment to acknowledge that today.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please, go ahead, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, and through you, thank you for the acknowledgement. And it was a great display of community yesterday at the celebration, and I know that around the region there was also other celebratory events taking place. And while this is still new to many, this has been a long-standing, I would say, celebration. And I just hope that maybe one day that the city may be able to follow suit in having a observance of a day off for staff and other personnel that just wants to take their time to reflect and share with their family in private and intimate moments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Appreciate that note and share in your comments. And yeah, anyone else?
I guess I'll have to fess up. My mother's father was a slave as a youth, and it was documented on the slave interviews. He was 100 years old in 1930 during that time, and it can be read. His name is Alfred. I was named after him. It's funny, my mother's name is Alberta. I always thought I was named after her, but she tells me no, it's after her father, Alfred Sly. Sleigh is a spelling. If you like to look it up, you can read his interview on the slave narratives.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Gary. Yeah. Alfred Sleigh.
Yes.
Anyone else? All right. Well, with that, let's open the roll for the meeting. Mr. Little, please call the roll for us here.
Okay, we can't hear Tony.
Yes, give us 1 second. He will be doing it from our computer. We're having some technical difficulties. 1 second.
All right, thank you for waiting. Mr. Nathaniel Gale.
Present.
Mr. Thomas Clark II.
Present.
Mr. Claudio Bazzano.
Present.
Ms. Kim Oliver.
Here.
Mr. Edison Silva.
Present.
Ms. Jahare Scribano.
Present.
Mr. Al Gary.
Present.
All right. With everybody present, we do have a quorum. Thank you and good afternoon.
Great, thank you, Mr. Little. And I'll just note for the record that Mr. Bizzano does have to leave a little bit early. That being said, it does look that we will continue to have a quorum even with his absence. So welcome. And thanks again to Mr. Clark, Mr. Gary for sharing some of your personal stories in the welcome. Our second item on our agenda is acceptance of minutes from our May 19th, 2022 meeting. These minutes were included in members' packets and posted publicly for review. Are there any comments or questions on the minutes? Anything staff wants to highlight?
Nothing to remark.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, moved by Mr. Clark, seconded by Mr. Gary. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 And any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, we have acceptance of our minutes. Let's move to item number 3, public participation. Since we continue to meet virtually, public participation and comments are supported using the comments function on either YouTube or Facebook, or by emailing comments directly to me. That's nat.gale@hartford.gov. That's all included at the top of our agenda. I have not received any emails for today. Mr. McCauley, who monitors our YouTube and Facebook, is there anything in those formats? Okay. All right, anything anybody currently on wants to add under public participation? Hearing none, let's. Okay, so that is a question regarding the status of the Weaver High School fire alarm. I will ask Jack Butkus from Arcadis to talk about the work that's been ongoing and any plan for future presentation.
At this point, information responsive to some questions from the Board of Ed chair has been provided. We're waiting for a meeting with myself, Mr. Gale, and the Board of Ed chair to discuss the additional information that was provided. And there is still an expectation that a full presentation on the status and the explanation of all the data behind the responses to the board will be presented to the HSBC at an upcoming meeting.
Great. Thank you. So let's have that noted in the notes that there's information has been prepared. There's a meeting that needs to take place that will then following that, we'll have a presentation at a school building committee meeting.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a quick question about that?
Yes, please.
Preparation. And Jack, I'm hoping, or I'm trusting that this presentation will just go through the history of the circumstance that we're facing. I have the drawings. I've looked at the drawings, and I understand. Well, it's not here to discuss right at this point, I think. But what I'd like to know is what was approved, I guess, and what was installed and why. I guess those are going to be my questions, basically. And I'll probably expand upon those as will we be able to address your presentation? Is that going to be made to us There's a lot
Yes.
to unwrap
Yes,
there.
there will be a presentation including members of the design team
Okay.
at a future HSBC meeting, and you will be able to ask any follow-up questions that you as members have.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Any other comments or questions on that? Okay.
Has that meeting been scheduled, Nat?
It has not. No, I recently received the sort of updated information, and so I need to review that and then work with Arcadis to schedule a meeting with the Board of Education members who should be there to review it. I think, Mr. Gary, to your comment, what I am looking for is making sure that we have a sort of full and comprehensive presentation of the issue, right, and not just trying to address one or a couple of different things. That is the goal. And I would ask that the materials are developed in enough time to send to the school building committee members with enough time in advance to review them prior to the presentation.
All right, thank you.
I guess Jack, do you believe that your team, if we get the meeting with the Board of Ed scheduled, in the coming weeks, do you believe your team has enough time to agendize that for our next meeting?
Yes, as long as the meeting with the board chair can happen. My intent would be to get as you mentioned, to get the information to the HSBC members with a little more advance notice than the typical agenda package, because it will be, there's a lot of data there.
Yeah. Okay.
So with the July meeting is on the 18th. So we would look at trying to hold that meeting with the board member in the next 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah. I guess, could your team reach out and try and schedule that meeting?
As long as your schedule is flexible, yes, we'd be happy to coordinate that.
Yeah. I would say next week, I have general flexibility later in the week, like Tuesday through Thursday.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one more follow-up question, if I may.
Please.
Would it be kosher for me to have a off-hour conversation with Jack about this, as opposed to waiting for the presentation?
Absolutely, I welcome that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I would open that invitation to any of the other recently appointed members if they'd like to get the general background before we get into the stack of files. I'd be happy to share that for everyone's learning curves benefit.
Great.
Thanks. I will look forward to that.
All right, any other comments on that? Hearing none, let's move on to agenda item number 4, our administrative items. The item we have under this section is a recommendation for a 7th member. So, as per our notes from the last couple of meetings, we asked for, recommendations for our 7th member. Just as a refresher, 3 members from City Council, 3 members from Board of Ed, who then collectively vote on a 7th member. And we have a resume submitted for Mr. Clarence Corbin, as well as a note submitted from the Greater Hartford African American Alliance in support of his candidacy. I would offer Mr. Gary an opportunity to speak on behalf of Mr. Corbin. You were the one who distributed submitted his resume. So if there's anything you'd like to say, I know there was some dialogue among the committee members. And what, I have reviewed his resume. He seems to be a stellar candidate, given his history. I don't know, Mr. Gary or other committee members, if there's anything you'd like to offer to that.
Not sure if expounding on his credentials is, well, they pretty much speak for themselves. I've known Clarence, oh dear, long time, outstanding, well, to me, upstanding citizen and resident of the city, which is most important to me, both those credentials. Not only is he a friend, but someone that I think would serve us well as being a member of this committee. And he, in my conversation with him, he was very looking forward to being so placed. And with that, I would just yield. But also, after I had made my support of this candidate known, it was supported by Mr. Bizzano also. So maybe he would have something to say along with what I just had said. You took me by surprise there, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't ready to speak on his behalf, but being that as it may, I wholeheartedly support Clarence Corbin, and I think he'll serve very well in this committee.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I'll just note, our notes reflect our conversation that this body had about what we were looking for in another candidate, and that included, Hartford resident, somebody with, construction experience, and then ideally somebody with municipal experience. And Clarence's resume certainly has all of that. Mr. Bizzano, anything you'd like to add, given your experience working with Mr. Corbin?
Well, the only thing I really like to add is I've had the pleasure of working with Mr. Corbin as my counterpart in the city of Hartford when he oversaw the Department of Public Works. He definitely knows the inner workings of the city, which is always a benefit in these kind of committees. There's more than just knowing construction. You need to know how to make things move and move things along and how to get things done. So I really look forward to working with him again. It was a pleasure the first time. I haven't seen him in a long time, but I look forward to it.
Great. Any other comments or questions from committee members?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please.
Through you, I wholeheartedly endorse Mr. Corbin as being the 7th member. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with him in a few different capacities, and I do think that he does have the knowledge and the bandwidth and the skill set and expertise to add value to our committee.
Great, thank you, Mr. Clark. All right, well, hearing all of that, is there a motion to accept Mr. Corbin as our 7th member?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Silva, seconded by Mr. Clark. All of those in favor of recommending the nomination of Clarence Corbin as the 7th member for this committee, please say aye.
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 And any opposed? And any abstentions? Hearing none, I'll just note again for the record, if we don't hear anything in noes and abstentions, we'll assume that there's unanimous support. And so in this case, Mr. Corbin has been nominated and approved by this board unanimously, which brings us to a fully seated board for the Hartford School Building Committee, which, yeah, I would say is no small feat. I want to say, a big thank you to everyone, every committee member who has shown up, both, who've been involved previously, and to all the new members, Ms. Escribano, Mr. Silva, Mr. Gary. This is a goal we outlined at the very beginning of our year. And, I don't know the full history, but certainly it's been a while since the building committee has been fully seated. So, big thank you to both City Council and Board of Ed for your role in doing this. And I would just ask that the administrative team reach out to Mr. Corbin to formally notify him and invite him to our next meeting. And we look forward to welcoming him at that time.
Absolutely.
Thank you to the folks who spoke in favor of him. I'm excited to welcome him. Again, his resume speaks to his experience in working on these types of programs. Anything else before we move on? Anybody else want to offer any words? I'll just say once more, so offer a dose of gratitude to Mr. Gary. My apologies for putting you on the spot, but I'm just so grateful for your service and helping us accomplish this milestone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're forgiven.
I appreciate it. All right, hearing no other comments, let's move on to agenda item number 5, current projects under construction. I will turn this over to the Arcadis team to review action items for our projects under construction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First item before us today is amendment number 1.2 to Newfield Construction regarding the Buckley High School renovation project. This action places 4 contracts which are deemed phase 6A. There's a typo in the block there in the data block. These are trade contracts for phase 6A, which is beginning to put the building back together, taking steps that are additive to the project now that the demo and abatement has gone as far as it can. The next step is to work on some site demolition, some excavation, preparing the floor slabs within the building to receive the new construction, and then some concrete work. These items were reviewed and approved by the bid review committee, and we ask your endorsement for the record. I will point out that there is a striking variance in the value between budget and base bid on the floor prep, which is package number 6.20. That budget value was derived from estimates that were done at the time we had hoped to bid this work, which goes back to late 2021. Since then, as the design has continued forward, some field investigation has also progressed. And we found that one of the floors, third floor in particular, was considerably out of whack, and that the amount of material to level the floors was going to be greater than what was originally calculated in the last estimate. In verifying that scope, Newfield believes that the base bid is an accurate representation of the actual labor and materials required for this, even though there is a visible gap between what was estimated back in the fall of 21 to the bids that we've now received. So we have confidence that these numbers are legit, in spite of being a little higher than we would have liked to have seen them. And again, this has been reviewed and approved by the bid review committee, and we ask the full committee's endorsement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Buckhis. Are there any questions from our members?
And one clarification for the record, AEG contractors, even though they share initials with our distinguished member, Mr. Gary, there is no affiliation between the parties.
Gosh, thank you. Thank you. That was shocking to me to see something as close to my past so present. And it's not me, I promise.
That would be quite a conflict, Mr. Gary.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. I did have one question. Just in looking over the full item and, the revised contract and purchase order value for Newfield at 36.7 with these changes. My question is just how does that 37 million essentially, how does that compare to what we originally budgeted? Did we budget more than that? And so we're good. Did we budget less than that? Just taking a step back and thinking about the total project cost, where are we?
Sure. Kelly, toggle ahead one page, please. There we go. for context, this is a project that is two projects wrapped up in one. The central admin functions, including the Board of Ed offices, et cetera, as well as the renovation of the school itself. And we have one master contract with Newfield, but it does have two components to it. Initially, there was a value for the Board of Ed office space itself that was done as a general contractor. And then Newfield has bid out other packages of work as a CM. Through the portions of the Buckley High School renovation project, overall, we are probably in the neighborhood of $2 million over where we had hoped to be for that scope of work. The dollars expended on the Board of Ed offices to date and other efforts to prepare for future phases in order to dovetail the projects together was a building block of creating the current budget for the central admin project of $29.75 million. So that number is solid because they were all building blocks to determine the cost of that portion of the project. And then the 26 million is just slightly over projection. And we are projecting at this point in time with what has happened in the construction market that the forward-looking phases, phase 7 and onward, will push us to exceed our current $149 million budget. The actual number is to be determined, but for the portions of work that are exclusively Buckley Reno components, which would have been our phase 5 and 6A, are and on aggregate a couple of $1 million over our original target, which frankly makes sense when you look at the trajectory of the project exceeding the 149.
That's helpful context. Yeah, I would ask that, whenever we're looking at revisions to contracts and purchase order, there's some information that allows us to compare it to the original budget, just that this body has that context and it's documented to file, so that we're aware of any future, necessary budget increases. They are tied back to approvals that we've made as a body.
Mm-hmm. We can do that.
Another question, upon approval, when is this work expected to begin?
Sal, can you speak to mobilization, please?
We have meetings scheduled next week, pre-job meetings to review with all the proposed contractors what the city requirements are for MWBE participation, Hartford residency participation, go over all of the financial reporting requirements, and then the issuance of contracts. The contract issuance is really what takes a little bit of time to get things out, get documents signed, and get all of the submissions. So we're probably looking at, I'm going to guesstimate at about a month and a half before we actually get started.
And is that, keeping us on our current schedule for August 2025?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Hearing none, is there a motion regarding this item?
So moved.
Motion to approve the item. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any final discussion? All of those in favor of this item, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, this item has been approved. Thank you, Mr. Butkus. You may continue.
Up next is change order number 10 to Newfield concerning the Buckley High School project. This concerns additional PCB and asbestos-containing materials that were discovered during the selective demolition, items that were undetectable until after we started removing some concrete. Total value of this change order is $38,467. This has been reviewed and approved by the change order subcommittee, and we ask the full committee's endorsement.
Thank you, Mr. Butkus. Any questions on this item from the committee? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So move.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Item has been moved and seconded. Any final discussions on this item? Hearing none, all of those in favor, please say aye.
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 And any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, that item has been approved. Mr. Butkus, please continue.
Next on our agenda today is change order concerning Burns Renovation. This is change order number 2 to PDS. It is in the credit amount of $38,560. As you may recall, when we authorized or accepted the bids several months ago, there were some trades that were unable to honor their bids, even though we were within the 90-day hold period, as their suppliers were no longer able to supply the materials at the cost at or even close to bid day. We had recently processed something for the electrical service gear because it just any opportunity to rebid would have been an additive number beyond the cost of the change order. When it came to the roof, that was another trade where the costs of materials had skyrocketed. And rather than pay the face value of the upcharge, we explored with the architects the opportunity to reevaluate the existing conditions, redesign the roof, and our goal was to come in at or below the original bid number, which could no longer be honored. So when we issued a guaranteed maximum price amendment to PDS, we included the original roof bid as our not to exceed number that we were looking for. Throughout the process of redesigning and then recently rebidding the roof, we were able to come in with a suitable product, maintaining the warranties necessary and coming in under that budgeted number by the 38,000 plus. So we are encouraged that we now have all of our trade contractors identified. PDS has reviewed this with the bid review committee, and the mechanism to move this forward was determined to be a change order, naming Silktown Roofing as the selected contractor and resulting in a net credit to the project. So this has been reviewed by the bid review, which is the same people as the change order subcommittee. And we are bringing it today for the full HSBC's endorsement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Butkus. A credit in this change order, given the award recommended to Silktown Roofing. Any questions from the committee on this item?
Move to accept the recommendation.
All right, we have a motion. Any second?
Second.
All right. And any final discussion before we take a vote? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, this item has been approved. Thank you. That, I believe, concludes the action items for our projects under construction, and what remains of this item is our project reports. So, Mr. Butkus, please continue.
Very good. Our project summary indicates that we are still on trajectory for an August 2025 reoccupancy for the central admin components and the school renovation components of the Buckley campus. One item that will change the next time that you see this breakdown is that our current budget values will be either amended or marked TBD and marked red for the eventual reauthorization for the numbers that we know have changed. For Burns, we are going in front of the OMB committee tonight to explain the request for a supplemental appropriation of $3 million to increase the budget that the council has approved from 52.4 up to 55.4 to capture all of the actual costs that were determined by public bidding. The next step will be for the city to seek the reauthorization of this project to change the face value from 47.7 to 55.4. But tonight's meeting and follow-up hearing with OMB will get that onto an approval path for the city council. We're still expecting a September 24th completion for the Burns project. There have been some difficulties in issuing permits to the trades. There was a holdup in the base permit, and then now we're looking to towards the receipt of those trade contract permits as well, so that we can initiate construction overall. But the number, the value of that construction, as I mentioned, has been determined by actual bids, so that we can move forward with the 55.4 with a level of confidence. For the buildings and grounds roof, a previous budget adjustment to increase the project from 800 to 900,000 is standing. We had some delays with the nature of the system going in and some weather impacts on the completion. So our statement had been spring of 22. I guess spring ends, tonight, and we'll still be looking at a small portion of work in front of us. So that the schedule for buildings and grounds will bleed into July, but it's moving quickly towards substantial completion. And at the current trajectory, we will underspend the 900,000. It'll be more than 800, but it'll be under the ultimate $900,000 budget. So we're encouraged by that. Any questions on our summary so far?
So I've got one comment just to emphasize something that you already said, and then one question. The comment is again for members of the committee. If you look on the Buckley renovation line, the current budget, right, that 149 million, that's going to change, right? That's going to be read with either an updated number or a TBD, as Mr. Buck has said. And I just want folks to be prepared for that, right? This is, given COVID supply chain issues, inflation, right? For all those reasons, as well as some of the, delays brought about by changes at the state, that cost that budget is going to go up. So we're still, bidding to try to determine by how much, but that is reflective of the change order that we just approved for phase 6A for that project. My question is, when we reviewed this last month, so Jack, this is a question for you. Mr. Gary noted that it would be helpful for him to see an abbreviated schedule, a sort of abbreviated Gantt chart that summarizes and condenses the overall scope of work. And I'm just looking at our notes. Mr. Butkus, you replied that it's something that will be available for distribution in this month's cycle. So I was just curious where you stand on that.
That was not distributed to the members, but we will follow up after this meeting to get that out as a point of information separate from the HSBC agenda package.
Okay. Yes, please do. Thank you.
Moving on to the EEO report. We have, again, limited work in place to date due to the redesign process and the value management process that has been ongoing at Buckley. So there have been no new tasks undertaken regarding the central admin portion of the Buckley campus. So this number will, for Hartford Residency, will stay in shortfall until we can re-engage contractors on the central admin elements of the project. Meanwhile, we have been proceeding with areas of work dedicated to the school proper, and we are in compliance and in fact over goal on both categories of MBE labor as well as Hartford resident labor. At Burns, phase 1 was for the pre-K classrooms. That phase is complete and will close out, indicating a bit of a shortfall, but we aggregate all of the phases together. And once we have a more significant workforce active on site at Burns, these numbers will merge as a project-wide total. Again, with very limited mobilization work able to be done to date until the permits are released. There really hasn't been an opportunity to make up for any of the shortfalls at Burns. But again, that will be aggregated and will be improving as we mobilize the various contractors. Are there any EEO questions?
I've just got one question on this phase 5 for renovation. I mean, is that, again, are you going to aggregate this over time, much like you just described with Burns, or will you be reporting in phases?
Burns has a single project number for the overall scope from the pre-K classrooms through the full renovation of the building. Buckley campus has 2 project numbers, one for central admin functions, the offices, the commissary, et cetera, and then a separate one for the school proper. So it has a foundation to remain as 2 separate line items.
Right, but I guess just so I understand, for future renovation line items, are you going to be reporting phase 5, phase 6, phase 7, right? Or
yes, I misunderstood. All? Yes, it'll be the renovation portion aggregated.
And do you anticipate that 90%, MWBE number to stay that high? Or is that, sort of just due to the nature of the contracts under phase 5?
It will change in the downward direction based on, it was just the nature of the contracts that we were able to let in this early portion, which had a significant minority contractor participation level. And they brought a lot of MWBE labor force as well. Again, with the project goal of 15% MBE labor and 30% Hartford resident labor, more often than not, we come in just at or slightly above the 30% on Hartford residents, and we come in significantly above the 15% goal for MWBE labor. It won't be 90%, it probably won't be 50%, but it will be robust.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, about that. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. About that, Jack, can we set aside any of these components that we could use the word target, but we can focus or encourage MB companies, and we've got good tradespeople out there. I'd just like to see a lot of this more directed to attract them. I mean,
well, this is just the labor portion of the program's goals. Beyond this, we have a set-aside program that earmarks 20% of the construction value towards set-aside contractors that are minority and women-owned businesses.
Okay.
So it's a multifaceted effort. So both in the contracting sense and then the labor, regardless of who the contractor might be, MWBE or mainstream, everyone has these labor goals of MWBE labor and Hartford resident labor.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I'm very interested in really getting those numbers up. Sure like to do that. Not sure how to do that yet, Jack, but we'll talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Great to have you on the committee, Mr. Gary. I'm sure your industry contacts and just industry experience will help be an asset in that goal. I share in that goal.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the project reports themselves. First up with Buckley. We have progressed only about 8% regarding the high school renovation work itself. Phase 5, to the extent that the work can be done, has been completed. The demolition and abatement effort includes such things as ultimately removing the old auto shop building, which currently houses the print shop. It also includes tearing the existing skin off of the building, which we're not ready for yet. So that contractor is on hiatus for a while. For the central admin functions, the central offices have been constructed, but again, there are elements such as the commissary, which are part of the new work, and then fitting out other spaces within the building that'll support central admin, which are awaiting final documents so that we can move forward there. As to phase 5, the abatement and demo in the auditorium is complete. The asbestos, the mercury containing floor in the gym has been abated. Locker rooms, natatorium demolition is all complete, and the exterior breezeway between the pool and the academic wing was one of the last areas, which again, the contractor has effectively demobilized as of the end of last week, pending the opportunity to return for other work. Phase 6 was modified to a smaller scope we called 6A. We've just approved those bid packages for that, and as Sal indicated, we received the bids about a month ago, had to rebid and clarify some numbers, and ultimately we'll be mobilizing within the next month to month and a half. Work on phase 7, which is the core shell and interiors, putting the building back together again for both the central admin components as well as the school itself, is well underway in design after some discussions with the city on confirming scope, seeing just how much we could and could not value engineer in order to try to reduce the ultimate supplement to the budget. Those decisions were made, and the design team is re-engaged to get the documents in biddable form as soon as possible. Our goal here, such as it was with Burns, is to get the bid numbers and then to seek the additional funds with the values that we had the highest confidence in, which of course would be the actual bid numbers. So we anticipate that there's still a couple of months worth of design work in front of us, and then we have to go through the OSCG approval of the documents after estimating, then get it on the street, review the bids, and then be able to report back. So we won't be in a position to really pencil in the revised number until sometime this fall. Items of good news that have occurred since the last meeting was that our space waiver was granted by the legislature. The building, obviously, from our previous discussions, had areas that were larger than you would typically design for a school of the current target population. We can't put the auditorium into the dryer and shrink it. So things like that needed a waiver in order so that we could preserve the asset without being penalized as far as the reimbursement from the state was concerned. So we did get a waiver on our space calculation, so we don't have to throw any of those valuable spaces away. We did conclude the value engineering effort to know what it was that our ultimate design was going to contain, which will lead us towards a biddable design. There were certain items that we were able to economize with, so there were adjustments to the budget made through those efforts. Central admin grant, there was some confusion in the transfer of leadership at OSCGR. There was an original $5 million value that was per discussions, and a letter of approval increased to 29.7, but it was never on record. So we need to go to the legislature to confirm that $29.75 million budget. And we have received some answers to operational questions regarding the Hartford Public Schools offices. in order to plan out the future portions of the work. So those were all very positive steps that have occurred since last month's meeting. Are there any Buckley questions?
Yes, I have a couple questions before opening it up to committee members. What should we be expecting in terms of closing out phase 6? You mentioned phase 6A is sort of a modified version. Should we just expect one phase 6B? And when should we be expecting that?
We discussed that with the design team last week, and due to some of the changes that were made in value management, they would impact some of the things that were already drawn that we had kind of pulled aside that we intended to be 6B. So by the time we adjust those items of scope to meet the decisions that were made by the board and the city, it would take just about as long as getting phase 7 on the street. So we have concluded that if there's no efficiency gained by bidding a 6B after all, we'll just roll it all up into a larger phase 7.
Got it. And if I heard you correctly, that phase 7 will be on the street in fall sometime?
Correct.
And that's when Mr. Gary is going to help get the word out to the local contracting community to make sure we continue to meet our Hartford resident requirements.
Yeah, somehow.
Great. Okay. So phase 7 will be big. I mean, that'll be a big package then.
Yes, it was already big, and it's going to get slightly bigger because of the absorption of phase 6B.
Yeah.
Jack, if I could interject, I worry a little bit that based on recent conversation here, that there's not a clear understanding of the effort that is ongoing, basically on a daily basis, by both Newfield and Nutmeg planners, as well as Arcadis O&G, to maximize minority participation on all fronts. I mean, we certainly welcome your involvement, Mr. Gary, but I want to make sure you don't think that it's all by chance right now. There's a pretty extensive effort that's ongoing every day to ensure that we turn over every rock, look in every crack, and there's constant contact with minority contractors and with the unions, because we are dependent, because of the PLA, we are dependent on them to provide both MWBE labor and Hartford resident labor to the various contractors that are not MWBEs.
Yeah. Oh, shoot.
Yeah. That's a good note, Sal. And I guess, something that I would might make sense for a future meeting, especially in advance of phase 7, is a presentation from this team on all of those elements, right? So that, especially for our new members, right, who may be seeing this for the first time, there is a clear understanding. So there isn't any questions about all the work undertaken by Newfield, by Nutmeg, and by Arcadis in advance of something going out on the street, to make sure that, we have a far and deep reach to the contracting community.
That's a very reasonable request, especially since we've got 4 brand new members.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy to do so.
Yeah. So, I would just say, depending on the schedule for phase 7, that should probably come prior to phase 7 being on the street. And, may end up being something you work with our vice chair, who will be presiding chair over July and August, to prepare for in one of the summer meetings.
Very good.
In addition, Mr. Gale, in addition to the work that takes place before the work goes out on the street for bidding, there's an everyday monitoring of the actual participation by each of the contractors. We obviously don't want to try to play catch up at the end of a project by someone who has fallen behind. So it is monitored on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, and I would say all that should be included in a sort of overview. Yeah. Any other questions from committee members?
Well, no, just like to make a little comment. I apologize for my phone going off like that. It was very poorly timed because Sal made a very important point there. Not to shake a fist at anything that's occurred in the past. I do know that Acatus has been working very hard to identify and encourage and to attract a minority participation, working along with Kurt Harrison and others. I realize that, and I'm just hoping that we can just make it as friendly as possible and do a little better. And I really think that's going to be an outreach effort on all of our parts, letting it be known from the chairman down that this is an interest of this body to do this. And I think we can count on the chairman for that effort, and also that posture, that position.
Absolutely.
Done.
Thanks, Mr. Gary. Any other questions on Buckley? All right, you can move ahead to Burns.
For Burns, as I mentioned, we have intended to, we've begun to mobilize. Our intent was to be in the abatement and demolition phase by now, but we are slightly delayed with the receipt of trade contract permits in order to be able to do so. There has been work done on site. The laydown area, the construction trailer, temporary fencing has been installed. There are additional areas of the building that will be prepped for construction during the summer vacation, so that we're able to roll from the first work area into the second. And now that school is drawing closed, we'll be able to start those preparations with the assistance of buildings and ground staff, et cetera. So we are chomping at the bit. The roofing contractor that you just approved earlier in this meeting is able to start the roof work as early as July. So that's encouraging. We can get the noisy and messy work of the roof out of the way over the summer break, making preparations for the installation of future rooftop equipment, et cetera. So there is a plan to minimize the level of effort to go back and touch the roof once the roof has been replaced. We were also, one item I neglected to mention when we were approving the action item, among the alternate bids that were sought were to increase the roof warranty from 20 years, which is the standard, to a 30-year warranty. In this rebid, the cost of upgrading to a 30-year warranty was extremely affordable. It was, I think, less than $6,000 to increase the warranty to 30 years. So that was readily accepted, and will provide a lot of value to the city and the school district in the future by extending the duration. Overall, the remainder of the project trajectory remains as planned. We hope that the time that we're waiting for those permits comes to a close very, very quickly, so that it doesn't begin to impact, the delivery date. But as an occupied renovation, we're going to be imposing on the life of the school population, already. If it did stretch, yet another month from August to September now, if that were to move forward, we're already there. They're already living with us. But our hope is to get out of the building as soon as possible and return everybody to a calmer, less impacted approach to education. So we're looking for any opportunities we have to speed things up. But our struggle right now is to get started.
Great.
Any Burns questions?
Any questions on Burns? Hearing none, move on to buildings and grounds.
Buildings and grounds, as I had touched on in the summary slide, is nearing completion. We have a little bit of change order work in the flow, but overall, we were fortunate to, as I projected, to come in with an anticipated spend that is less than the $900,000 budget, which will be good for all. Our reimbursement rate on this particular effort is only 40% of state funding. So every dollar we save is definitely a larger savings to the city than it would be otherwise on the other projects that are receiving 95% from the state. So we are hopeful that progress will lead us to completion in the month of July, pending the receipt of some materials that are still on order. Any questions?
No questions from me. Any questions from other committee members? Hearing none, we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item number 6, future projects in development. So as we've been doing in the last few meetings, we carry these 3 bullet points so that everybody is aware of the sort of schedule of future projects. We've got projects under procurement for program manager, which are the next 3 schools that were approved by the state of Connecticut in our school building program. So those 3 schools are Betances, Kennelly, and Wish. At our last meeting, this committee convened an executive session to review some of the information regarding the selection committee's recommendation. And we are joined today by the City of Hartford's procurement team, Michelle Harrison and Sue Shepard. For any additional questions, there is a item to approve the recommendation of the selection committee, which was included as an attachment from Julia Jack, an architect with the Department of Public Works. That recommendation is to award project management services for those 3 schools to Collier's project leaders. We received 5 responses, and after review of the qualifications, the Collier's team scored the highest. So this is a recommendation to allow the chairman, myself, the Office of Corp Counsel, as well as procurement to facilitate, negotiate, and complete this final contract so that the work for these 3 schools can begin. And there is some time pressure on this given when the awards were provided by the state. There is a 2-year time window in which construction needs to begin. So this, the approval of this recommendation for award will allow work to begin. So are there any questions on this item for future projects? This will allow us to move from projects under procurement for program manager to projects actually under solicitation for design and construction, and get these 3 projects added to our sort of current project status for this project.
Mr. Chair, through you.
Yes.
Can you just explain the process as to if there's anything that this body needs to do, or basically this is now in the hands of procurement and corporation counsel?
Yeah, this body would just need to approve this recommendation to then give Corp Counsel procurement the ability to negotiate, sign, finalize, and start the work that then can report here. And I guess I would ask if either Michelle or Sue are on and can have a different answer to Mr. Clark's question, please correct me. Hearing none. Mr. Clark,
yes, the contract is actually draft. I sent a copy to Corporation Counsel for review, and I sent it to Colliers for review to sign. So it's with both legal teams.
Any additional questions?
I'm not sure quite how to ask this. I was under the impression, and I'm not sure how this came to me, but I was told that this body was not required to approve this.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mr. Gary. And I think I'd ask either procurement, corp counsel, to weigh in on this. Given that this process was managed by the procurement arm of the city of Hartford, this body does not have any formal legal need to approve the contract. However, I believe there is a requirement for state audit purposes to have the school building committee formally, review and approve this item.
It is then an approval and not, I don't know what else could it be if we're, well, I'll listen to other comments as this comes clear to me.
Yeah, I mean, is anybody on the call have a clarification to what I just stated?
So me, myself, coming from the procurement department, I'm not sure why this is coming back up as an approval item, because I believe we'd already discussed this. So I myself cannot answer that question. That would be whoever actually came up with this agenda and put it together. Again, we're at the point to where we're already moving, where the contract was already sent to Colliers and it's out, again, as Sue said, to both of the legal teams, our court counsel as well as their legal team to review the contract. So I'm not sure.
Nat, this is Emily from Arcadis on GCNR, if I may interject.
Please, go ahead.
As to answer Michelle's question or statement as to how this came up, the state auditors, when reviewing all state projects, the governing body is the Hartford School Building Committee. It has been my experience in the last 5 audited projects that our office has completed with the state that each contract has to have meeting minutes recorded in an action item where the Hartford School Building Committee approves this recommendation. And this is not just with project management services, this is with all contracts that you as the chairman will sign on behalf of the city. There has to be recorded meeting minutes and an action item to accompany it saying that the school building committee as a whole has approved this. If not, then this will be an ineligible item for reimbursement. I provided this to Julia for the fact that when discussing with Jack and reviewing the agenda, this had not been made formal. We thought it was wise to advise the city that this could be an ineligible request come up if the state auditors who sift through meeting minutes for each of the years go and realize that there is no approval. That's the way that it has worked for our audited projects that are closed and city has received payment. So we just extended to Julia that this had to come through the governing body. You do have to get their approval, just like you get approval for a change order from the recommendation states that you are authorized to sign the AIA change order document. It's done through FF&E for FF&E, for technology, for everything that the city issues a purchase order for this high of an amount. There has to be a meeting minutes that support it. Otherwise, when the auditors come through, which is a requirement to provide meeting minutes, they go back and check and you'll be missing a piece.
Yeah.
That's how this action item came up to be placed on this agenda for a recommendation.
Okay, so that is actually not what the city ordinance says in regards to the Hartford School Building Committee. So again, that I'm not sure what you want to do as far as this item.
Well, I guess what I would say is what Emily just described is not doesn't have anything to do with the Hartford ordinance, right? Like we could certainly approve this work and start it without the school building committee approval. But if we want to get reimbursed by the state, we are required to have an action from the school building committee.
Correct. You have to have record of it, that you've explained the way the process was, which you do in your background. You said 5 responses. So what they will do I'll add to that, when the auditors come in, if you list 5, that's what they expect to see, 5 responses. And everything that supports the backgrounds, an RFP and RFQ, and all the selection backgrounds.
Yes, we have all of that.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, if you needed those documents are on file. So we have everything that shows how they were selected. So if that request comes from the HSBC when it's time to submit it to the state, everything is documented, including the project summary. So at this point, once the contract is executed, then that'll finalize the selection process.
Right.
And you will need to accompany your meeting minutes to provide that your meeting minutes will state that everybody agreed and everybody approved it. And unfortunately, that has been our experience through up to 2 years ago when we did the audits of the projects. And I do not believe that the state has changed its requirements for requesting meeting minutes of the building committee.
Yeah. Right, so that the extra piece that is needed is the minutes from from a meeting that says that we took a vote vote to approve this recommendation.
Correct, and like you just stated, you can go ahead and issue a contract. Your issue would be at the time of audit when the state does its audit and it requests for you to provide all meeting minutes that support the documentation that you will provide to the state for reviewing your audit.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily, for that context.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I would just say that certainly, the city of Hartford is not in a position to carry this full contract amount, right? We are relying on the state's 95% reimbursement rate. And so given the need for, a documented approval from the building committee, I would ask for support from the committee members in approving this recommendation, given the process that was overseen. So I'm prepared to make a motion to approve this, and would ask for a second for us to take a vote, and we can have additional discussion before we take a vote. So I will formally move to approve this recommendation for this award based on what Julia from Public Works and our procurement division have summarized, and I would ask for a second.
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded. Are there any additional questions, discussion? So all of those in favor of the recommendation, please say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
And any abstentions? So I guess, Mr. Little, can you read the votes?
I think Tony may still be having some technical issues.
Technical, okay.
In my hearing, it wasn't completely clear who was voting which way.
I heard ayes from, basically Mr. Gary, Miss Oliver, Miss Escribano, and Mr. Silva, and a nay from Mr. Clark.
That's correct.
Okay. So with 4 votes, this item carries. All right, thank you all. Continuing down the future projects in development. The next 3 projects under consideration, under development for submission to the state are Moylan, McDonough, and Parkville. And those 3 projects are currently underway under an application process. And I believe draft documents for that application were just submitted this morning to Hartford Public Schools, as well as the City of Hartford. We have a due date of June 30th to get those applications in. These are also items for those of you on City Council that will be before the OMBGA committee this evening for review and approval of draft project budgets for these 3 schools. That is a requirement as part of the state application process. So those will go into the state, OSCGR review process. And this fall, we will anticipate hearing one way or another. And if approved, then we can start the same procurement process that we just went through. And hopefully get another process where 5 competitive responses are received, and we whittle it down to a short list and then a final award. So again, that process in and of itself will probably take about a year. So this time next year, we hope to be taking another vote to approve another program management contract for Moylan, McDonough, and Parkville. So those are, that's the sort of very loose life cycle for those schools. And then next year, we'll be starting to develop the application materials for Batchelder, Sanchez, and Sand. And so again, that's how it's cataloged here under item number 6. The last 2 bullet points are just the status update of those projects that are under development for state application, Moylan, McDonough, and Parkville, and then projects that will be developed for future years, Batchelder, Sanchez, and Sand. Any questions on those items?
Hi, I have a quick question. I'm hearing, questions that are coming up from community on some of these schools, and just wondering about communications. I know you mentioned that obviously we're going through the process right now, and at certain meetings, council, et cetera, things will be presented. But are there any opportunities or ongoing efforts in terms of what is actually being communicated to community? Because I do believe some people are thinking schools are being closed, et cetera, because rumors are abound out there.
That's a good question. I'm grateful for the partnership with Hartford Public Schools in this program. I don't know of any current plans to make additional presentations. I would want to make sure anything is coordinated closely with, my partner and colleague Sherry Davis Gouge and the Hartford Public School administration. So yeah, and I don't know if that's something that also has come up at the Board of Ed, Ms. Oliver. So happy to have some conversations about what that could or should look like. And I'm sure other partners would want to engage in that. So yeah, I don't know if you have suggestions, or Ms. Davis Gouge, if you have anything you want to offer on that topic. Yes, I would want to work in lockstep with you on that.
Yes, if I may. Good afternoon, all. I would say first that as we move through school choice and facility committee meetings, we certainly provide an update there. Chief Black-Burke also has been in communication with some community partners, but we wanted to make sure that we just had enough information to share that help families in our community know where we're going next. So in terms of Batances, Swish, and Kennelly, we certainly have been in contact with the community. And in the next 3 projects, we were just waiting for a better timeline. So we certainly will continue to communicate out. And as we plan for it, we'll definitely, again, work with the city as well as keep the board notified.
Thank you for that. And what I'll do is I'll encourage residents to, view those meetings, et cetera. Because I think, like I said, people have questions and they just don't know where to go to. And so certain assumptions are being made. So.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis-Gouge. Any additional questions on future projects? All right, hearing none. Next item number 7 is project closeout. We don't have any major updates on additional project closeout. I don't know, Jack, if you or anybody from the Arcadis team has anything to note under this category.
We are still in contact with OSCG regarding the review of the remaining state change orders on both Weaver and MLK. They still have not completed that process. And so without having those transactions in the record, we are precluded from filing the final documents, which would initiate the audit process. We had hoped that would be completed by the end of this month. It looks like it's drifting into the 3rd quarter of the calendar year, and we keep pushing whatever buttons we can find in order to encourage that process forward. But there's, as I've spoken to some of my colleagues with projects elsewhere than Hartford, we're experiencing similar delays in being able to close projects out across the state. It's just a tremendous backlog of work there at OSCG. And unfortunately, the city doesn't get their final payment and the release of retainage from the state until that audit happens. So it's high on our priority list, does not seem to necessarily put us on the top of the state's priority list, since there's a lot of other municipalities in the same boat.
Understood. Thank you for that update. Any comments or questions from the committee on that?
I have a quick comment through you, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Jack, assuming that everything is submitted to the state per their requirements, what's the turnaround time for the city to be reimbursed from OCG?
The state no longer has a deadline on themselves. There used to be a window that said if the state did not proceed with the audit within, I believe it was 2 years, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, that the municipality could hire their own outside auditor and expedite the audit and then present the findings for the state's review and ultimate final payment. They've taken that out of the arsenal of weapons that we have to fight for our final dollar. And right now the state has whatever timeline they feel that they can support with their own internal auditors to get the job done. There was legislation passed just last month, at the conclusion of the 2022 session, that was encouraging municipalities to get their paperwork submitted on time, and that if it wasn't, that within a 3-year window of substantial completion, they would assume it to be complete. That's all well and good, but I think the greater proportion of projects awaiting audit are those that are awaiting final transactions from the state, not from the towns sitting on their hands. So it would be difficult to project, even if we were submitting these 2 projects for audit today, it would be difficult to project just how quickly they might get around to producing the audit and sending that final check.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Clark. Any other questions? All right, moving on to other business. We have a couple items under other business. The first is, just the standing updates on student involvement. Myself and the COO for Hartford Public Schools, Sherry Davis-Gouge, will be working together over the summer to come up with some thoughts and ideas on this topic. So nothing to report on this for this committee, but just to note that it continues to be, something that we want to focus on and look forward to bringing more information back to this group. I'll also note something we covered at last month's meeting. For July and August, I will be out on paternity leave with a due date around the corner. Mr. Vice Chair, Honorable TJ Clark, will be overseeing the meetings for July and August. And Mr. Clark, just so you're aware, the team will be adding you to preparation meetings to review the agenda ahead of time and discuss items that need to be on the agenda. So please be on the lookout for those meetings. And then I wanted to read into the record one public comment that I got that came through. So, returning to our public comment portion of the meeting, I got a note from Angela Harris that asks for an update on the status of the City of Hartford's easement to CT Natural Gas at 415 Granby Street, also known as Weaver High School, with an explanation for why Hartford Public Schools, Weaver High School students and staff would assume this risk with no potential community benefit for Hartford residents or scholars and staff at Weaver High School. CNG operates gas lines on Bloomfield Avenue in West Hartford that could be considered for the intended use. Thank you in advance for your assistance. I'll just note that that is an item that I am aware that has gone in front of City Council. It is not something that this school building committee has jurisdiction over, but I know that the City Council received a presentation from the stakeholders. It wasn't Connecticut Natural Gas, I believe it was University of Hartford. And they held that item without approval pending further information. I would continue to monitor the City Council schedule for that item to be back pending further discussions on, risk or potential community benefit. And I'm not sure if anybody on this call who has been involved wants to add anything to that other than, that's an item that Council is currently debating. Any comments or questions on that other business?
Hi, Nat, can I just chime in for 1 minute and just say, going forward, we will have to modify all change orders from Jen Hockenall's signature to Leanne Rouse, Director of Finance, Acting Director, CFO. So any change orders going forward as of today should have Leanne's signature.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Shepard. That's a good note to file, something to document. Jen Hockenhall, our current CFO, will be leaving the city. And so the new acting CFO is Leanne Rawls. So please note for all change orders that Leanne Rawls is the interim CFO and should be noted as such in the routing process. Thank you, Sue, for that note. All right, any final thoughts or questions? All right, well, our final item is adjournment. I would like to make a motion to adjourn in honor of Alfred Slay, Mr. Gary's ancestor. I just was very moved and touched by what you shared at the top of the meeting, Mr. Gary. Again, especially given the observation of the Juneteenth holiday. A desire to continue to advance all the values of equity and justice and ways that us and our community can continue to get free Mr. Gary, I would invite you to second my motion to adjourn in honor of Alfred Slay.
Well, before I second the motion, I'd like to say just over my shoulder is my grandmother's china closet, who I did know. This is not as formal or as intricate as some china closets are, but this was on Gregg Street in my ancestor's home that you will see on Alfred Sligh, S-L-I-G-H. You can read that. And I was so nervous getting it up here from South Carolina. I know everyone wants to go. So with all of that, I second the motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Gary. Thank you to all of our members today for your service. If I don't see you, I'll see you next time. You'll see me. I'll be a proud father. So thank you and look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nat.
Well, thank you.
Bye. Congratulations.
Congratulations.